Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, we'll break down the technical baggage that led to the new FREAK SSL flaw, the security ramifications of top executives using their own personal services, and why we just need to stop hiding file extensions. And then some great feedback, a rockin' roundup, and much, much more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi, everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 204 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly Systems Network and Administration podcast. We stream this episode live on March 5th, 2015. This episode is brought to you by our three fine sponsors, Ting, DigitalOcean, and iXsystems. I'll tell you more about those great sponsors as this here show goes on. Why, our live stream, I'm glad you asked. That's powered by the incredible Scale Engine over at scaleengine.com. You should go check that out. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, the admin, the tech, and the teacher, Mr. Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Hello, Alan. I'm excited. You know me. I love a double recording session. Even if it did mean right before the show started, I got red, sticky water juice all over the studio kitchen.
Well, don't shake your carbonated beverages before you open them.
Do you think Rikai will clean that up while I'm doing the show?
No.
Probably not. No. All right, Alan, we've got a lot to cover in our first episode today. And this one I saw bouncing all over the web, but I saw a lot of discussion, or I saw a lot of votes in our subreddit this week. The freak flaw. I didn't even get a chance to read about this, and I believe this is where we're going to start, correct?
Yes, it is.
All right, break it down for me, sir.
Right. So, yes, as you said, this was all over the news recently. And so to really understand what's going on here, we have to kind of have a mini history lesson first.
Okay.
If you go way back into the early days of encryption and stuff on the internet, and maybe even back further into the 80s, the U.S. government had restrictions on cryptography.
Yeah.
So the idea was, we don't want, the Russians or anybody else to have really strong encryption, because then we won't be able to break their encryption and read their messages. So they have basically, starting in World War II, they considered encryption to be a weapon. And so exporting to another country was like arms smuggling.
Yeah.
Right? And so then eventually they're like, well, some products are going to need some encryption or whatever. So they passed a law and they restricted it to, I think it was like 40 or 56 bits of encryption.
Okay.
Sorry.
Are you mathing right now?
No, I'm fixing the show notes, but because of the Zoom, the cursor is actually where it looks like it is. I hate that.
Yeah, I know. I hate that too. And you know what's even worse is I have on a high DPI display, I have to be zoomed in at 200% sometimes, and then it really gets crazy.
It's just all over. Yeah. So, so there was a law that prevented strong encryption from being exported. So when Netscape came up with SSL to provide encryption for websites, they designed into the protocol this idea of a downgrade to export encryption, which is the encryption everyone else was allowed to have.
Right.
The U.S. and Canada and certain other countries were allowed to have strong encryption, but everybody else could only have weak export encryption.
Right.
And so there was this system built in where we would use nice 1024-bit RSA keys that are nice and strong, but everybody else can only have 512. That way, the NSA could crack the stuff without going through too much effort. But it was good enough for commercial use. Right? Your competitors couldn't crack it, but the NSA could. So, the web servers that served SSL would negotiate down to the 40-bit DES encryption using a 512-bit RSA key if the user's browser didn't support the stronger crypto. And that law is actually one of the historic reasons why OpenBSD was always built and sold from Canada, to get around that restriction, right? And that's also why the MD5 password hashing algorithm was come up with, because nothing stronger could be exported, and so on. Anyway, the restrictions on strong cryptography export from the U.S. were changed in 1996, and that's when we started allowing things like AES 128 and so on to be exported, and everybody could have the good crypto.
I remember like even certain types of computers were classified as, were not classified, were marked, was labeled as like not okay for export.
If it's more than so many MIPS or whatever, you couldn't export it and so on.
Yes. It seems like, that seems crazy now, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's like, you can't export supercomputers to Iran.
And that was the 90s.
You can buy 1,000 regular computers.
That was the 90s.
Yeah. And not until 1996 did they finally stop the nonsense.
That's funny.
So this new attack takes advantage of the fact that the code for this export crypto was never removed from servers or browsers.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. So an attacker who's in a man-in-the-middle position can then modify the initial request that the client sends to the website to set up the encryption. So the encryption is not set up yet. So the encryption isn't, A, the message is in plain text, and B, the authenticity of the message isn't verified yet because you haven't set up the encryption. So if you're in a man-in-the-middle position and, Chris is trying to go to a website, I can intercept his request, modify it so that instead of asking for strong crypto, he asks for weak export crypto.
Mm-hmm.
And then he goes and talks to the server. The server's like, oh, you only support export crypto? Okay, let me set that up for you. And then goes back. Now, the client on Chris's side should be like, no, that's not what I asked for. But because of a bug, it's not.
Right.
All right. And so it just accepts this weak connection and goes, and, now the bad guy can do stuff. So this is also compounded by another thing, though. It turns out that generating these keys used to be relatively expensive, right? Normally, like, you generate this one big key, and then you would just use that and come up with a temporary key and so on. But for the export crypto, by default, Apache only generates that key when it starts. So it reads your key, makes up a weak export crypto key, and it doesn't create a new one. It doesn't cycle that key until you restart Apache. So that means if you're a bad guy and you're going to set this up, if you find some website that still has export crypto, then you can basically get that key and then go and factor it. So that requires a lot of computer power. But turns out that if you rent some of the really big GPU instances of...
like the NVIDIA kind?
Yeah, the NVIDIA GPU instances on Amazon.
Yeah.
You can crack a 512-bit RSA key in 7.5 hours at a cost of about $100.
That's worth it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I find this website that's got some sensitive information I want, or the users of it are going to submit information to it, like a store that accepts credit cards or whatever. I go and factor that key for $100, and now I can sit there and intercept every connection going to that box. And because I have the private key decrypted or brute force now, I can decrypt all of the sessions and see all the information going back and forth. The other thing is, because of the way SSL works, that key is what's used to make sure the message wasn't modified. But because I have the key, I can then modify the message that the website sent you, say, add a flash exploit into the page you're looking at, and re-sign it. And then when your end gets the message...
Take advantage of Superfish.
Yeah. When your end gets the message, it will see, oh, this is signed by the right certificate, and so it hasn't been modified. Right? So even though you're modifying the message, it's not detected because you have the private key to re-sign the message.
Interesting, Alan.
Yeah.
And the researchers were from the University of Michigan, right?
The researchers found this were from Microsoft and a French university.
Oh, okay.
But then researchers at a university in Michigan, which have been doing a project to kind of catalog the SSL features of all the web servers.
Yeah.
They found that 36.7% of websites that have a certificate that would normally be trusted by a browser still support export crypto.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So basically, this is kind of similar to Poodle in that it allows the attacker to force you to downgrade to a weak encryption that then they have a chance to crack. So that's how it works.
Yeah.
So many of the sites that were still have the export crypto enabled were government websites. I think the front page of the FBI, the NSA, and a bunch of other websites.
Oh, wow. Surprise.
Where that one would be a great one if you could intercept people's traffic and inject a Trojan or something into the website. Or just change the message on the website to be something, that could scare people. But one of the other things that was causing that number to be very high is some of the CDNs like Akamai still had export crypto enabled. Probably because, it's kind of their business to make sure that when somebody tries to go to your website, they don't get an error message. And so no matter how old their browser is or whatever, you still want them to be able to connect. And so they still support this old stuff. And they're quickly remediating that now. since the export crypto shouldn't really be required by anybody's anything
anymore.
In the last 15 years, really almost the last 20 years.
There's probably a lot of things like that we have cleanup to do on.
Yeah. Well, TLS 1.1 removes support for the 40-bit keys. And I think 1.2 is going to remove, or did remove, the 56-bit keys. But most people are still using TLS 1.0, which still allows that old export crypto. Probably an oversight when we came up with that a while ago. But hopefully we can get everybody transitioned to newer stuff after this series of craziness.
Yeah.
Now, Ivan Ristic from Qualls, which is the company that runs SSL Labs, that that website you go to and it tells you how good your crypto is set up on your web server or your browser.
Yeah.
They said, in practice, I don't think this is a terribly big issue, but only because you have to have many ducks in a row to do it. You have to find a vulnerable server that offers export crypto. Then that server has to reuse its key for a really long time. Otherwise, you crack the key and then it changes and you're like, oh, shit, right? Then you have to break the key, which is, $100 retail. Then you have to find vulnerable clients, and then you have to be in a man-in-the-middle position, which isn't that hard to do if you're on a local network or Wi-Fi at the coffee shop or whatever, but it's not, easy to do to a specific person.
You have to have some territory advantage usually.
Yeah. You can't just easily do this to everyone.
Yeah.
Although, you can sit in a coffee shop and intercept lots of traffic.
Yeah.
So it's not that easy. But what I recommend people do is Mozilla published a nice guide where they have all the ciphers and the order you should put them in. And they also have the explanation of why they have it in that order. And they offer a couple different versions. It's like if you really need compatibility with Windows XP and older, like stock Windows XP, where they're still going to be using IE6 or whatever.
If you're stuck in that
use
position.
This one, but normally you should probably use this one, and it has the explanation and the criteria and all that broken down.
Very cool.
I've seen a couple of the other ones like this where they just tell you what to do, but they don't explain why, and then you're always like, well, why is it in that order? And the Mozilla one actually explains why. But the biggest thing is if you look at your SSL Cipher Suite declaration line, whether it's Apache or Nginx or whatever, make sure it has the !export, which means not export. So any of the cipher suites that are labeled as export encryption will be disabled that way. And you want to make sure you turn off DES and MD5 and anything that's in the low group and lots of other ones like that. But making sure you don't have those would be a good thing.
Yeah.
Ideally, you would just grab the list there from Mozilla and change it to do that in that order. And that will definitely improve your score over at SSL Labs. And then the cryptographyengineering.com has a bit more kind of analysis of this stuff. And they kind of break down how the man-in-the-middle attack has to work, or how it actually works. So in the client's hello message, it asks for a standard RSA cipher suite. The man-in-the-middle attacker changes this message to ask for export RSA, which is saying, I want a 512-bit certificate. The other interesting thing here is we've actually changed now the requirement for new certificates is it has to be at least 2048-bit. So dropping down to 512 is a big drop, and the client shouldn't allow that. So then the server responds with its 512-bit export RSA key signed with its long-term key. The client accepts this sweet key due to the OpenSSL or secure transport bug. So OpenSSL is the open source one that's used on, basically every Linux anything.
Yeah.
On Android, etc.
A lot of appliances.
Secure Transport is Apple's version of that, which also has the same bug in it. And then I think Mozilla uses their own thing called NSS, but so I think that's why Firefox isn't affected by this.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. And
anyway, then once the client accepts that, the attacker then factors the RSA modulus of the key to recover the RSA decryption key. When the client encrypts the pre-master secret to the server as part of the connection setup, the attacker can now decrypt it and recover the TLS master key, which allows them to decrypt the entire session. So the attacker gets to see the original plaintext of the messages going back and forth and can inject messages from either side. So they can do things, they can add stuff to the request pretending to be the client, and the server will accept it. and they can add stuff from the server's answer, and the client will accept it. Because the entire point of SSL, in addition to the encryption, is also the authenticity requirement. Right? You're making sure that the message was not modified on the way by a man in the middle. But if the man in the middle has the keys, then they can do that.
Interesting. Next week, we'll have a story that kind of goes into a little bit about that and how somebody was able to exploit Uber, in a sense, because of a tool they used. They talk about a tool that grabs the traffic.
Well, in particular, I think it was the code in the Uber app wasn't verifying the identity of the certificate.
Don't spoil it, Alan. That's coming up next week.
So this was a bug that was in both OpenSSL and Apple's Secure Transport, and that's why it affects Chrome or the Android browser and iOS and Apple and Safari and so on. But yeah, the biggest kind of surprise here is that we changed the requirement, I think 2013 or 2014, so that no new SSL certificates can be issued that are less than 2048-bit, but the clients were still accepting 512-bit keys.
Yeah. It is the ghost of crypto past.
Kind of the problem of the internet is that it's hard to get rid of old crap.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and it's in every single. It's in code. It's in standards we use. It's in firmwares on our devices.
Appliances and firmwares are probably the reason, right?
Yeah.
There's some device with a microscopically slow CPU that could only do 512-bit or something like that.
And sometimes once this stuff gets into production, it never gets out. That's why you got to make a good choice at the beginning. You have to make the right choices.
This is why the transition to IPv6 is taking so long, because everything has to still work for IPv4.
Totally.
Somebody's still going to have it's also the reason why we can't solve the spam problem.
Totally.
Because we would just have to fundamentally change email. And how would we convince everybody on the internet to upgrade to one new standard?
Not anymore. Somebody'd want to own it, like Google'd want to have the Gmail API and something.
Microsoft would have to have their own separate one.
Yeah.
They wouldn't be compatible.
Of course, you'd have the Apple one that only works on Apple devices.
Yep.
Oh, man. All right, Alan, any other thoughts on that story? No, I don't think so.
No, there's some extra links here. Yeah. In particular, the researchers that are doing this have their site SMAC TLS, where they're basically doing fuzzing and testing and stuff to find more and more of these vulnerabilities in SSL.
SMAC TLS, huh? Cool.
Yeah, so they're just going there and basically fuzzing and doing stuff to purposely try to eke out as many of these as quickly as they can so that we'll be able to...
That's cool.
Yeah, so basically they're attacking the state machine inside the TLS protocol to find problems in it. And it's interesting, so they're not necessarily targeting OpenSSL specifically. They're checking all SSL implementations.
All right, Alan. Well,
it looks like one of the other ones they found affects Java.
Oh.
And it's SSL.
All right, well, our next story I find particularly revealing about a much wider problem in the U.S. But first, speaking about making the right choices when you deploy technology, I want to tell you about DigitalOcean. Head over to DigitalOcean right now. And remember this, we've got a promo code, SNAPOcean. If one word, lowercase, it's going to get you a $10 credit over at DigitalOcean. And here's why you might want to do that. DigitalOcean is a simple cloud hosting provider that's dedicated to offering the most intuitive and easy way for you to spin up a cloud server. That translates to saving you time. That's the number one thing for me. It also means it's not confusing at all. So regardless of what your expertise level is, you're going to be able to manage DigitalOcean if you're a listener of this show. And you can get started in less than 55 seconds, and pricing plans start at only $5 a month. For 512 megabytes of RAM, a 20 gigabyte SSD, one CPU, and a terabyte of transfer. And DigitalOcean has data center locations in New York, San Francisco, Singapore, Amsterdam, and London. They're gorgeous. They got pictures of them online. And I have to tell you, I think I've got 3 active droplets. Sometimes I have 4.
I have one for Skill Engine. We're starting to build a status website. We're scheduling some maintenance stuff coming up, and we needed a good way to communicate that with our customers. And so I looked at a couple of different status dashboard softwares. I tried a couple written in Python and got frustrated and had to write my own. Well, it looked like Discuss had a nice one that they had been open sourcing, but then it seems that the person that was working on it there kind of left and started as a service, and Discuss just switched to using the service. But I didn't feel like paying $99 a month for a status page. So I pay $5 a month over at DO to run an instance where I can run FreeBSD, Nginx, and
I've got
Python or whatever,
the
and make it
value,
work.
I get 3 of them, and I can't believe how much I can do on 3 DigitalOcean droplets. It blows my mind. They're all the $5 rig, too. And I get emails from folks that are using it for like the coolest stuff. The one that I've been hearing a lot more is from dads who are setting up a DigitalOcean droplet to host Minecraft for like 3 or 4 kids to play on, or like just a small group of kids to play on. So it's nice and safe, and but it's public, and it's on a good, powerful system. And there's tutorials, so even if you're not an expert, you can get set up.
Exactly. You don't have to be a Linux expert to set this up for your kids.
No, and in most cases, the DigitalOcean pricing is cheaper than any of the dedicated Minecraft hosting. And then you can also use it, like you could have a mobile server on there, so they have it, or a TeamSpeak or whatever, so they have a nice private, safe spot to chat for $5 a month. And it really is not going to be hard to get started, because the DigitalOcean droplet is just it's incredible. It's super intuitive, but very powerful. And in fact, it's so powerful that you can replicate the functionality without even having to use the dashboard, because they have an API that lets you get to all this kind of stuff. I'm talking like the snapshots, the DNS management, the backing up your system, the deploying applications via the one-click installations like GitLab, Docker, Ruby on Rails, WordPress, Ghost, lots of stuff. Plus, they all back it up with those great tutorials. So go over to DigitalOcean, use the promo code SNAPOcean, and get started with your own cloud server. You'll see how awesome it is just when you do updates. They've got free BSD now, lots of Linux rigs, some good choices. Just doing package management is a thrill, seriously. And then all the cool stuff you get to build. DigitalOcean.com, SNAPOcean when you check out. And a big thanks to DigitalOcean for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. Okay, Alan, so this isn't really politics anymore. When it comes to this kind of story, this is more about data security, maybe trying to skirt the law. But Hillary Clinton, right?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hillary Clinton this week is in the news a lot, because it turns out that during her time as head of the State Department, she used something like, what was it, HDR22 at clintonemail.com or something like that. She used her own private email server hosted in her own house.
Was it actually at her house?
Yeah, it's actually at her residence, in one of her residences in New York, yeah.
Interesting. So part of the reason I decided to cover this is just because this is something that happens everywhere, right? It's not just Hillary Clinton that was doing this. You see people doing this when they work at a company and lots of other places.
And actually, Colin Powell did it, and there's some indications that John Kerry does it to a small degree. He has his statement was, I have an official email account that I use for most my activity, or something like that. So I think a lot of people do this.
In particular, when Colin Powell was doing it, it wasn't a law that you weren't supposed to do it. Now, the reason why, obviously, the government does this because they want to be able to keep the history.
It's a federal retentions thing, yeah.
Yeah, partly it's for history and so on, but also because they need a record of everything that happened, because these official communications, they used to happen as letters in the mail, right? And or something equivalent. They were usually couriered rather than just sent through the post office. But it was an actual letter they got, so they would look at it, and then the government would keep the original. Right? And so it was, they had this paper record, and with email that kind of changed, and they needed a system. And so a couple of years ago, they came up with this rule that, all it has to go through the official email account, because everything that goes through there gets saved, right? So that we have a copy of everything. But sometimes people are using their private email addresses.
Some people don't follow the rules.
Yeah. Well, and the interesting thing is that oftentimes, I don't think people really think about this, but I remember it was one of the things they tried to explain to my class in college when we were doing we had a little course on, resume writing or whatever. It's like, make sure you have a professional looking email address when you put it on your resume, right? You don't want to be, I like big butts at hotmail.com when you're applying for a job.
Yeah.
And that was before. Now the college actually provides a first name last name at mohawkcollege.ca email address. But the problem with those is that they used to keep working forever, but now they started, kicking people off because they switched from, I think they used Planet Web or some decent mail server before, but now they use Exchange, and so they have to kick people off once they're not students there anymore.
That's kind of sad.
Yeah. But anyway, so a couple of quotes from the article here. Hillary Clinton exclusively used a personal email account to conduct government business as Secretary of State, and may have violated federal requirements that officials' correspondence be retained as part of the agency's record. Right. So in particular, they just want to have copies of everything. Mrs. Clinton did not have a government email address during her 4-year tenure at the State Department. So it seems like they just, she never asked for one, so they never even set her up one. It's not like she had one she just didn't use. They just never had one
and
at
in
all.
fact, I see. This is. Tell me what you think about this. Okay, so hold on. Let me pull up a picture here for you to help demonstrate. So we talked about this a little bit last night on Unfilter. We did, at a different track, and so I got for the artwork. I got this picture here. Here's Hillary. She was famous for traveling around. Checking her email on her BlackBerry. Lots of pictures of her reading her State Department email on her BlackBerry. So somebody had to configure her BlackBerry, her State Department secured BlackBerry, to connect to her home email server. That somebody was probably an IT guy. So the IT department must have known that she was using her own personal email and wasn't using a State Department email account because they were configuring her BlackBerry.
Right. Well, it's possible you can figure your own BlackBerry, but it's hard to say. It says, her aide took no actions to have her personal emails preserved on department servers at the time as required by the Federal Records Act. So apparently it's not uncommon for, the person in the big role as the Secretary of State or whatever to not know or care about the rules, and their aide just make sure that the email gets copied out to the State Department's email server so they have a copy, but that didn't happen. And so on. It says, it was only 2 months ago, in response to a new State Department effort to comply with the federal record-keeping practice, that Mrs. Clinton's advisors reviewed tens of thousands of pages of her personal emails and decided which ones to turn over to the State Department. In total, there were 55,000 pages of emails that were given to the department. So that raises two interesting things. Is obviously she was using this email for some stuff that wasn't for the State Department, right? It'd be one thing if especially if they had this, ClintonEmail.com or whatever special server set up, if she had one inbox for official stuff and another inbox for not.
Actually, there is some word that she might have had multiple email accounts.
Well, I'm sure she did, but it seems like they decided it wasn't just everything that was sent into her email address that was for the State Department or whatever.
Yeah, they went through and handpicked.
I'm sure she had one for family or whatever and one for work, but the work one contained some stuff they decided not to give over.
Just on the same train here, though, what makes, if we extend this out, what makes text messages that much different, or an instant message, a Skype log message history, or something like that? Should those all also be under state accounts and logged?
If the State Department shouldn't be conducting official business over Skype, probably.
No, I agree, but what if there was...
Yes, they should probably have something.
Yeah, I mean, if there is some communication over text or something like that, which must...
And I think there's a reason why things designed for corporate use like that, like WebEx, have a feature to record the meeting so that could be preserved.
Yeah.
But that's not to say that it is being done properly.
Yeah. See, the problem is all these systems usually...
It's kind of the problem with the whole bring your own device thing with the corporate network is that when people bring their own devices or use their own, decide, I'm just going to use Dropbox to share these files with these people or whatever, like we talked about, is that's outside of the IT rules. And so these policies, it's harder to apply these policies when everybody's just doing things willy-nilly.
But the flip side of it is, if you're interfacing with a lot of different governments and people that, all have different rules, sometimes you can't have a secure chat program unless everybody's using the same program. Well, that's why things like email, that's why everybody just defaults down to things like text and email, because that's universal. And it could be something small I can't send a large attachment to that email account, so send it to this account, and things like that start happening even. And this really gets squirrely really fast. And it's clear, too, politicians have a reason to do this, because, if the email server's in your house, then they're going to have to come knock on your door to get the information. And there's just protection in that degree, too. There's incentive as a politician to have it like this as well.
Yeah. And then here they have... a quote from Jason Barron, who used to be the director of litigation for the National Archives and Records Administration.
Yeah.
It is very difficult to conceive of a scenario short of nuclear winter where an agency would be justified in allowing its cabinet-level officers solely to use private email communication channels to conduct government business. And also here, under federal law, letters and emails written or received by federal officers, such as the Secretary of State, are considered government records and are supposed to be retained so that the congressional committees, historians, and members of the news media can find them. There are exceptions to the law for certain cases like classified or sensitive material. But it also raised the question, how many emails were in Ms. Clinton's account is not clear, and what process they use to decide which things should be handed over to the State Department and which shouldn't is also, we don't have any idea.
Talk about a waste of people's time now, too, to go through all this crap.
But yeah, when I was reading, it wasn't clear where this email was hosted, whether it was like something like Gmail or Outlook, and obviously there's huge security implications at just hosting on a big platform like that. But you're saying
she has
a private super.
She has a private little. Well, the Clintons do at one of their New York residences, and here's the best part: it's guarded by the Secret Service. So, they have pretty good security.
Right. So nobody can break in and steal the hard drive.
Yeah.
But who's in charge of configuring that mail server?
What's
their security clearance?
The guy's name is Eric something. I talked about it last night in the show on Unfiltered. He's been with the Clintons since the 90s, and he's their chief technology guy. And he set it up.
But what's the security clearance?
Good question. The IP address is actually registered to him as well too, and it's like clintonemail.com or something.
Right.
It's in this. It's actually in this New York Times article.
Okay, it's a long article.
Yeah, it's super crazy long. And then the location of it, I think, came out after this article, but her actual email address is in there. Yeah.
But yeah, there are fairly large concerns there with, what if that guy decided that, the French government was willing to pay him a bunch of money to see what was in Clinton's email?
I suppose that could always happen. They seem to trust the guy. But
also, yes, and maybe he's trustworthy, but as the administrator of this email server, he had probably had access to read all of the emails. And does he have a security clearance that allows him to be able to read all those emails, right? He probably doesn't, right? He's a private employee of the Clintons, not of the government.
Here's a little bit of this is just a clip from CBS here talking about her at her home.
Press traced her emails to an internet service based at the Clintons' home in Chappaqua, New York.
Computer experts say a private server would give Clinton a great deal of control over her messages. Margaret Brennan is at the...
So there you go.
Yes, I host my own email because that control is very useful.
Yeah.
But I'm not getting government emails that are sensitive, and, my concern there is that how many people had root access to this email server, and what was keeping them from reading messages they shouldn't have.
My major concern is more how much does this block the public's access to information? Even if there's a freedom of information request, and then the government determines, okay, well, we have to go to the Clintons' personal server to get that. It talks about in this article, to do that they have to go to the Clintons' lawyers, which immediately means then the Clintons' lawyers have an opportunity to put it on hold and block it and argue it in court to delay it. And then, of course, if the FBI wanted to physically show up and take it, or somebody wanted to physically show up and take the information, whoever that would be, you'd have to wonder if they'd have to contend with the Secret Service. So there is an obvious attempt here to hide information from the public, and I would bet that she's just the tip of the iceberg, and that happens.
I wouldn't say it's necessarily they did it on purpose to hide information. It might just be, I would prefer to use an email server I controlled as well. But
sure, I suppose so, especially if I was a politician under a lot of attacks.
Yeah, but I definitely think that the government business should be conducted on the government's account so that they have that record.
Yeah.
For exactly the reasons you specify.
Yeah. I wonder. We'll see what happens.
And so kind of the reason I brought up the story is because the same thing happens at private companies, right? It's not something that only happens in government, and
right.
It kind of has implications that you will see elsewhere. So if you're working in IT at a big company, you're likely to see people sometimes using their private account to, whether it's just emailing themselves files, which are going around your policy about making sure data isn't getting exfiltrated from your company, to other stuff, right? So if I work at this company and I start using my private email and having customers of the company email me at that private email address or something, how does the company comply with rules that require them to keep certain emails for like 7 years for legal reasons? Because they're not administrators over my email account, whereas on the if it's their email server, even if I delete the email, they have backups and snapshots or whatever, or it doesn't actually get deleted when I delete it, it just gets hidden from my inbox.
Yep.
They have the backups, it's their responsibility. If it is my email account, maybe I'll try to keep it but I'm not an expert and I don't have a backup and it goes away, and now the email they're legally required to have, they don't have. Say you're an employee and you leave the company if you leave the company, they can take away your access to your old email account, and you don't have access to all the old emails you got anymore. And more importantly, if new emails get sent there, they can be forwarded to your replacement rather than going to you. Whereas if you used a personal address that the company doesn't control, you get old customers contacting you, and you're like, "Oh, I'm actually at this company over here now. You should come over and move your account to my new company."
Yes, that I have watched that several times.
Yeah, I've actually done an investigation on something like that. There one time, there was an employee of an engineering firm, and he had a company-issued laptop. And then one day, he just up and left and moved to the States and worked for a competitor.
Oh.
And when they finally got their laptop back, they gave it to me, and we did a forensic investigation on it.
Yeah.
And we found that in his Hotmail account, which back then he was using Internet Explorer. It was years ago. And the way the spell checker worked, because it was ActiveX, was it would save a copy of the email to your Internet Temporary Files folder, then run the ActiveX spell checker on it, and then put the results into the browser. So that means there were cached copies of the drafts of his emails on the hard drive. And we managed to undelete those, get
very
them,
nice,
and go through it, and be able to show that he was, while working at the company here in Canada, talking with the company in the US, describing what documents he was going to steal from the company he was working for in Canada and bring to them, and setting up to live in Texas and getting his buying a house and getting the utilities all hooked up, and the whole conspiracy was all there in a series of emails.
Wow, that was a big boo-boo.
He didn't do this on his company email account where it would just be sitting on their server.
Right, of course.
He just didn't do a very good job of cleaning up the company laptop he was using when he gave it back.
Got a little sloppy.
Yeah. Well, he didn't know what he was doing, right?
Yeah.
He was like a mechanical engineer. I think the company made vacuum things or something, like industrial vacuums or something. It was not computer related. Anyway, so yeah, you have the problem of, you can't revoke access to the archives. You can't make sure the emails go to the right person after the fact. And there's a bunch of problems, and this is why you should definitely have corporate emails. But also, as we were mentioning about the resume thing, corporate emails is kind of a way to look professional, right?
Yes,
if your employees are emailing with a @gmail.com address, you're like, meh.
Honestly,
the worst one is when a company's email address is companyname@gmail.com. You're like, was that a one-person company?
Yeah. Yeah, honestly, if I had met Hillary Clinton in person and she had told me, like, yeah, email me, here's my email address, I would have been like, are you S-ing me? Hillary Clinton's,
for a personal email, that would make sense.
Yes, if personal email only, yes, that would make sense. For personal email.
Or, even if it was for, election stuff or something, if you were emailing Hillary Clinton, then that makes perfect sense. But if you're emailing the U.S. Secretary of State, then that should be,
I agree.
Like that, honestly, that should be a role email address. Right,
because you'd have to have
Hillary.Clinton at state.gov or something.
Right.
It should literally be the title of the role, and then that email account automatically transitions over to the successor when that happens.
That seems like you'd have to do it that way.
Yeah. Really? Because the government of some country that I guess just wasn't aware that Hillary Clinton was replaced with John Kerry or whatever, and just randomly emailing Hillary Clinton, and she's supposed to email back, be like, oh, you should talk to my replacement now? Right. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, hey there, sorry, I'm no longer working there anymore. You need to email.
Obviously, the way it would actually work is you would have individualized email addresses so that, if somebody's sending a memo, you can send it specifically, yes. But then, yes, there should be a role-based alias that goes to the right person, and that's the one that people should be emailing.
Yeah.
Their client should all be set with a reply to so that, every email they send gets sent back to the right address and so on.
Yeah.
But the problem is that your random politicians probably are not as proficient at email as other people.
No, but their aides and staff should be proficient at that stuff. That's where their roles, right?
Yep.
All right, Alan. Any other thoughts on that story?
No. I was just saying that, while, yes, this is a big story about the government and public access to information and all that.
You could change the names. And exactly. Yeah. It's the same story if you just change the names.
Yeah, if you change his name to be the CEO of some company was doing this, you would have exactly the same thing.
And even though, it makes sense that people would try to do this, I never really thought about it. So it kind of brought this into our minds as well. Hey, Alan, why don't I tell you about something else you should be on your mind? That's Ting. Go to techsnap.ting.com to get the TechSNAP discount and support the show. And while you're there, check out a few features. You're going to be pretty impressed by Ting because they do things a little differently. It's mobile that makes sense. They have no early termination fees and no contracts. You only pay for what you actually use. So when you go to Ting, you don't have to buy like this one type of plan or this other type of plan or this really big plan just in case you might need it. That's all artificial. That's fake. Ting just eliminates all of that. It's just a flat $6 for your line, and then it's just your usage on top of that. Your minutes, your messages, your megabytes. Ting adds it all up, and that's what you pay. It's really easy to manage. I've got 3 lines, $6 each, an HTC One, an Nexus 5, and an iPhone 5, and it's like, I think $37 to $40, somewhere in that range. Because we're pretty good with Wi-Fi, and you'll save a lot of money if you check out Ting. In fact, one way you can find out is Ting has a savings calculator. When you go to techsnap.ting.com, you'll see this Ting savings calculator. Go ahead and put your current usage in there. So minutes used, let's see, I use about 200 minutes a month. I actually do almost all of my texting over Telegram now, so I probably get about 5 text messages, maybe at most. I do kind of weigh in on data quite a bit, I range a lot depending on the month. Sometimes it's as much as a gig, but usually it's somewhere in about the 500 range because I use a lot of Wi-Fi. Now, I have 2 devices, so I'm going to have to also put in Angela's. Now, Angela uses a little bit more minutes. She uses probably about 500 minutes, and she uses about 35 text messages, but she pretty much uses Telegram as well. And she uses about 400 megabytes of RAM, of data transfer. And so our bill was quite a bit of money. Alan, I was talking to producer Rotten Corpse. His bill right now is $200 a month for around this kind of usage. So I'm going to say I will just split it across evenly and say $100 for each. Now, that could depend a lot. That could vary a lot. Like some people, it might be $50 a line. Maybe it's like $80 a line. You could just tweak
mine, is $75 for 200 minutes, unlimited messages, and a gigabyte of
and then just overages if you go over.
Yeah, although I never go anywhere near any of those numbers.
As long as you're on Wi-Fi, and that's what's great. So Ting doesn't have any overages because it's just whatever you use. And I'm like Wi-Fi all the time, so I'm the same. I'm in the same spot. So like going back to the savings calculator, we'll just kind of run this. This would be pretty like Alan and I kind of usage here because you're at home a lot, Yep. But even there, look at that over 2 years, you're going to save $1,600, almost $1,700 by switching to Ting. You go to techsnap.ting.com. They've got a lot of really great devices over there right now, and adding even more as they roll out the GSM service. I pulled out a couple you might want to check out. Brand new on the Ting network, the Unimax MXE 675. When you go to techsnap.ting.com, it's $81. $81 for a dual 1.2 gigahertz Android 4.2 smartphone for $81. I mean, you can get in with Jelly Bean for $80. And no contract, no early termination fee, and then you just pay for what you use. It's unlocked. It's yours. You own this. It also has a camera. It's got 32 gigabytes of storage. So, it's not actually that bad. A 5 megapixel camera for $80. Check it out. Also, of course, my beloved Nexus 5, $349, and you own it. No contract. Go to techsnap.ting.com. Check them out to start saving right now. And then you could apply that money to something real fun later on.
Like, even if I took the numbers from my plan, which, it's like you get this much of these and you always have to use less or pay extra. Mm-hmm. Even if I used all 1 gigabytes of my data and all of my minutes and so on, switching to Ting would still save me just less than $1,000 over 2 years.
Yeah, that's nice. That's nice. Yeah. That could be an SSD upgrade. That could be, there's a lot of things you could do with that money.
You get a couple SSDs for $1,000.
Yeah. Okay, so for the love of all that is holy, can we finally just accept the file extension? Alan, right? Yeah. Am I right?
I don't know why this was ever a thing.
I think maybe Apple. Can we just blame Apple?
Windows started it, I'm sure. But
what, hiding the extension? But didn't they do that to copy Apple? Because Apple didn't. In the early days of Mac OS, all of the document information was stuffed in metadata in the file system. So you wrote to this extra field.
Files just didn't even have extensions, right?
No, none at all. And so you download a file, and like the author of the application could stuff it in that field automatically, or the first time you ran an application, it would add it to that, and that would even persist when you moved it across Macs. So they were like, hey, you don't need file extensions, but the file system takes care of it. But of course, that was only for them.
In Unix, file extensions didn't really have a meaning, right? The file dots were just another character.
You mark a file executable or it's not executable, and it was kind of up to you to track what a file was, but also there's this thing called libmagic and the file command, and it can basically look at the first little bit of a file and be like, oh, this is obviously a JPEG, or this is obviously an executable or whatever. But so in Windows originally, like Windows 90 DOS and then Windows 3.1 and so on, the FAT file system had a restriction. The file name could only be 8 letters, and then you'd have a period, and then you could have 3 letters for the file extension. And that was it.
And then that file extension eventually became related to what do you call it? File associations, where when you double-click a file, it would open that app.
Yeah,
but
Windows
back
would
in
keep
DOS,
track
they
of
didn't
that.
have that, right? The file extension was just informational.
Yeah.
And sometimes it was just like, well, why didn't we just say file names could be 12 characters?
Yeah, I know. I've always wondered that too, but yeah.
I could give a much more meaningful name to the file with 12 characters than have to have an extension.
Yeah.
But I guess a couple of files, they had something kind of like file association, I guess, because, .bat files could be executable, right? And you had .exe and .com, which was different.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah. Yeah, okay. Yeah, because you can only run it, Yeah, so I guess there was, but it wasn't so much like an index that things could add and subtract.
Right. There was only like 4 file extensions that were...
Yeah, it was built into the core of the OS.
Yeah. So anyway, over at thestack.com, they have a discussion of common user interface problems, and, they talk about other pet peeves of mine, like web browsers, especially Chrome, turning your browser into like a dumb TV appliance, right? Hiding the protocol prefix or hiding the URL bar completely. And also the tabletification of the web.
Oh, yeah.
Websites changing to be everything's just like 2 big pictures on the website and that's it.
Yep.
Responsive design is an interesting idea, but the whole point of responsive design is to be like, here's what our website normally looks like. Then if the screen is too small, take out these bits and only show this more important information.
Right.
Whereas some websites said, well, that's a lot of work to basically have 2 versions of the website, even though the idea with the responsive design is you render it with just tags and then just delete the parts you don't need. They're like, oh, well, let's just make one really dumb version of the website that'll work on every device.
Yeah.
It's like, I have this giant screen. Why is the website only taking this much of the page?
Huge fonts, huge pictures.
Yep.
Everything stuffed under hamburger menus.
Exactly. And it's like, And also the scroll bar. Apple's inverted the way the scroll bar works, because if you're on an Apple, it's most likely a laptop and like a MacBook. And if you're using a touchpad, scrolling by sliding up like you would on a touchscreen apparently makes more sense.
They call it natural scrolling. I can't stand it.
Exactly. It's like I've been scrolling down since the 80s.
Yeah, since mice were a thing.
Yeah. And, even on my touchpad, I'm used to scroll down to go down. And, I'm not sure why phones decided to make you flick up instead of down, honestly. But anyway. So on top of that, they also talked about the file extensions and the problems it causes. I remember the first time I saw this, 15 years ago, when you could name a file, something.jpeg.exe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? When Windows added long file name support, where you could finally have more than 8 letters in the file name. So then we ended up with, the Anna Kournikova virus, right? Mailing around this picture or this file that looks like a picture, right? So you call it, annakournikova.jpeg.exe, and you make the exe's icon be the Windows icon for a JPEG. And now everybody gets this email and like, oh, it's a picture, not a program, so it's safe to open. Double click, boom, infected, right? That was 15 years ago, and they haven't changed the default in Windows to make it not do that. And it's just, they say Windows users still need to manually activate extension visibility, even though email transmitted viruses depend on less savvy users who are never going to do this. Right? And the other big thing is that now that we're in the age of interoperability with other file systems and the internet, and even just some of the other stuff we have, we have FLAC files. That's a 4-letter extension, right? and so on. And
dun dun dun.
Yeah, Windows just breaks down. Like, also, Windows doesn't like you to create files that start with a dot still.
Yeah.
It gets very annoyed at you.
Yeah.
You can do it, but it gets very annoyed at you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, yes, it's perfectly fine for me to have a file called .htaccess.
Yeah, I know. Right? Yeah.
You can't actually make a file association for that in Windows, I don't think. It still doesn't work properly. But it doesn't, I don't know why they can't just enable file extensions and leave it be.
Well, I think it'll happen.
When? If it's not Windows 10, it's basically never going to happen.
Well, I think it's going to happen, but I think it'll happen more like abstracted from the user. Like the operating system will keep track of it like in a database somehow. I think it'll be there, but the user's not going to see it as much.
What?
Well, so think about
the point of this is just the file. It's there in the file system. All we have to do is stop truncating it in the file name.
I would wager you that in 5 to 10 years, Macs will ship without even real access to the file system. And here's the other thing: once you're in like the modern UI of Windows 10 or Windows 8, and you're accessing files between you're pulling files from OneDrive. You're also not looking at file extensions. They are trying to move away from file extensions, Alan, like a bunch of insane maniacs.
But really, instead of file associations, what we probably should have is something like libmagic, although it's had a couple of security problems before. And then, that gives you the MIME type. And then instead of a file type association, you have a MIME type association.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a JPEG. Yeah. I open my JPEGs in Picture Viewer.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's why I just name everything .txt.
Windows hasn't had that, right?
Yeah, well,
yes, one of my biggest hacks on my Windows machine is a registry entry that adds open with Notepad to the right-click menu of every file type.
Yes.
And, not to every file, but just every file, period.
Yeah, because you might want to open any file in Notepad.
Yes.
Yeah.
Although I deal with so much Unix, I also have one that opens it in a text editor that actually understands /n new lines, right?
Yeah, yeah. Otherwise, it's a mess.
But yeah. Anyway. That's all I just wanted to
Good soapbox, Alan. I'm right there with you. Yeah, I'm right there with you.
Screw Macs and Windows for not doing that.
I'll tell you about somebody who gets it. That's iXsystems. Go to iXsystems.com/TechSNAP to check out more, support the show, and look at some of those amazing rigs powered by them Intel Xeon processors, and actually other Intel processors as well.
If hit under the
the Ultra Core. The Ultra Core?
Ultra Core.
I already have it pulled up, Alan. I already have it. So awesome. And you know me, I love it because it runs Arch, too.
So in the past, we talked about the Mega Core, which is this crazy 4-socket machine.
Yeah.
This is Ultra Core. Yeah. It's big cousin.
It's real big cousin.
It's got 4 of the new Xeon 15-core processors.
Oh,
15 cores plus hyperthreading for a total of 120 threads or 120 logical cores. Oh my God. It also has a terabyte of RAM, which is the same amount of RAM as the old Mega Core. The difference is because these new Intel processors support 1.5 terabytes per socket, this system could be upgraded to hold 6 terabytes of RAM.
Wow.
And as you can see in the picture there, in order to stuff that much RAM in it, because it has 96 RAM slots, they basically had to just stack RAM on every surface in the machine. Right, you can see in the middle there's all RAM, but on the sides and the other side, and they're literally just stuffing RAM everywhere there is free space.
This is so amazing. This is a custom build if I've ever seen one.
Yes. Wow. And the greatest thing is, so the customer called up, needs this custom build. iX had it done in a week.
Wow.
Even though they'd never built anything this big before.
Look at all those CPUs. That is so amazing.
Yep. It's more, look at all the RAM.
Yeah.
So much RAM.
Yeah.
All the RAM.
Yeah, really. Yeah. Huh. That's and I didn't catch what it does, but I did catch it runs Arch Linux.
It's going to be used for science.
Science. Boy, I'd love to know more about it. Yeah.
It's actually going to run Arch Linux.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, I know. That's why I'd love to know more. I'm like, science and Arch Linux on this kind of, I would love to know. Oh, boy, that just really gets me excited thinking about how fast that thing is. So this is where you have to get started. Go to iXsystems.com/TechSNAP. Now, if you're like me and you just need some nice, reliable storage for your small business, they can handle that. All the way up to the craziest stuff that only your biggest dreams could come up with. I mean, they can do it. And the great thing is they've got the bench to pull it off, from the software experts, the people that actually have created the technology you rely on, some of the best open source enthusiasts, advocates, and developers. They've also got the partnerships with the hardware companies. It really is a win-win, and they wrap it all up with white glove support. So go to iXsystems.com/TechSNAP and check them out. So cool.
In particular, they also have, they've just kind of stealth announced that FreeNAS just got the first commits to be able to handle automatic hot spares.
Oh, yeah, cool.
ZFSD is actually a thing now.
That's really exciting.
It's been committed to the FreeNAS repo. There's no release with it yet, but it's coming.
It's coming soon. So when that kind of thing means coming soon, it's coming soon like 6 months, or does that mean like a year until everybody's got it?
Probably sooner than 6 months for sure.
Nice. Hey, speaking of BSD, you know what just hit the interwebs just a few minutes ago while we were doing this here TechSNAP show? That would be episode 79 of the BSD Now program. Just add QEMU.
Yes, that's talking about using QEMU to build ARM binaries for things like your Raspberry Pi on your real big computer, so it doesn't take months.
Oh, very nice. So that is episode 79?
Using a big AMD 64 to compile for ARM and MIPS.
And this would be a good spot to start the download because we're about halfway through today's episode.
Yep. Get
the HD version. Check it out with Alan and Chris Moore. And looks like a good one, Alan. Cool. All right. Well, you know what that means? We've come to the end of the news segment. And once we are at the end of the news segment, that means there's only one appropriate action to take. And that is the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your emails to TechSNAP at JupiterBroadcasting.com or popping that contact link at the top of the Jupiter Broadcasting website, or even better, starting a thread in our subreddit over at TechSNAP.reddit.com. And Alan, our first email this week comes in from Kenneth, and he's got a couple of big ZFS questions. He says, "Hi, Alan and Chris. Congratulations on 200-plus episodes. I've been watching somewhere since around 10 or 20, and TechSNAP is a weekly event that I look forward to. Love the show and the level of depth of awesomeness you guys keep delivering on a weekly basis." Well, thanks. Buttering us all up. So he's a Unix sysadmin at a hosting company, and he says the show's helped quite a bit all around. I used to work a lot with Solaris, so now they're using a lot of ZFS now. And Alan's endorsement of ZFS on FreeBSD has helped a lot in the decision to migrate those systems to FreeBSD, and everything now runs much smoother than before. So here's the questions. Number 1, Alan, I have written a ZFS replicator shell script that works on FreeBSD and Linux. It supports grandfathering scheme with incremental ZFS send. Alan, what's a grandfathering scheme?
So that means basically, it's like when you're doing incremental backups, and you'd be like, I want to, keep one a month for so long, and then
grandfathering the back. Okay.
Yeah, like the backup scheme.
Okay. With incremental ZFS send and receives with recursive snapshots and a lot of other features. I'm not a seasoned coder and would normally keep this kind of stuff to myself, but with your encouragements to putting your code out there, even if it's not ninja level, made me document the script and beautification on it. And do some beautification on it, figuring out GitHub and posting it on there. And he links us to that. It's on github.com/bungask, BUNDGAS/ZFS-replicator if you're looking for this. It's also in the email in our show notes. He says, I want to add the functionality to keep the oldest snapshot, the grandfathers, for longer on the slave than on the master. But when I tried that, the ZFS send receive itself destroyed the oldest snapshot on the slave on the next incremental sync. As I'm doing an incremental sync on the newest data, why would it have to destroy the oldest snapshot on the slave? Shouldn't the oldest snapshot be able to exist if there is enough space on the slave and not be destroyed because it was removed from the master? Is there a way around this? I use recursive snapshots and send them recursively and incrementally, if that makes a difference.
As long as the newer ones are in sync, keeping older ones on this slave should be fine. One way you can do is you can use ZFS hold to lock the snapshot so it can't be deleted, and then see what error message you get, and it will explain more why it's doing that. I'd have to look at your script to see what's going on a bit. I'm kind of wanting to look into that more. I've not because I wanted to, but because no one else was, took over maintainership of the similar script ZXfer, which does basically the same thing. And it can sometimes be a problem. In particular, I'm very excited about the conference I'm going to next week because one of the talks is from Matt Ahrens, the co-creator of ZFS, talking about new features specifically in ZFS replication, including the resumable send we've all been waiting for forever, but also apparently something similar to a ZFS rebase, which allows you to do to sort out a problem when you have your incremental replication go sideways and you don't have a common snapshot between the two sides anymore, to be able to not just have to resync everything, which would be huge value to me, considering that I'm replicating huge amounts of data over the internet all the time.
So I bet you've run into this one, Alan. Question number 2. Sometimes we have hard drives that start to sort of fail and crash slowly, and ZFS will partially or completely hang when that single disk with 100% weight with minimal or no throughput. Once we couldn't even execute ZFS commands, it would just hang until we physically removed the crashed drives, and everything would then kick back again on FreeBSD. We use SAS and nearline SAS on LSI HBAs with the newer firmware, and we only sometimes see errors in the Z-pool status when this happens, so that can't be trusted to detect all the errors. I've had this problem on both Solaris and FreeBSD, so I think the people must have seen this too. Other people must have seen this too, but not much seems to be written about it. What's the best approach in handling this? You know, what could I monitor? What scripts could detect this?
Yeah, it's the biggest problem is that disks don't fail completely. Oftentimes, they just kind of hang around and stuff. Normally, there's timeouts, and basically the drive would, it could hang for 30 seconds at a time. And you get 4 retries as the default on SATA. On SAS is a little different. And then the device should actually just disappear. Like the OS should just reject the device then and act as if it was unplugged. And then the pool should be able to continue. It might depend slightly on how your pool is set up.
Have you had that kind of laggy thing where it just doesn't do transfer very well when there's a drive in there? I've noticed that.
I've had one where on a SATA-based array,
yes,
where one of the drives was dying and it would, pause for like 8 seconds at a time.
Yeah,
and
that's exactly what I saw.
Once I lowered the retry count in the OS to make it not try so hard, it sped it up a little bit.
Oh, interesting.
And eventually, because because I had the redundancy, I just Z-pool offline the drive and got my performance back until I could replace the drive.
Yeah.
And then I resilvered it and went on. But yeah, sometimes it can hang. Make sure you're using newer FreeBSD. That helps a lot with a lot of the niggly stuff has been sorted out a bit. And then in the end, I would say you have to look at the SAS controller and see if you can't make the device time out when it's misbehaving.
Yeah, that seems to be that would be the trick. All right.
But yeah, it can be a bit of a problem there, and catching it is an issue. I had a worse problem when I was first using ZFS on my very first setup. The Adaptec controller card we had a problem where the driver would hang.
Or the
driver or the device, or the driver would cause the device to do something, and it would just go away for hours at a time and then come back. And so ZFS just stalled waiting in the whole time, and then it would come back finally and it would catch up. And it was just like, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah, very frustrating.
Yeah, in that case, it was actually the controller that was the problem.
Yeah.
In your case, it's hard to say. Nice one is when you are having problems is if you can run GStat or something, but sometimes you have the problem if your operating system is also on the pool in question. And so, when the pool's not working, neither are your tools in the operating system. Yeah.
All right, very good stuff. Hopefully some of that will work. GStat.
And he notes at the bottom that his script isn't meant to compete with ZXfer. Apparently it's different. I'll have to take a look at his. It might have useful features I can steal.
Yeah.
But in particular, ZXfer does have a switch to say, don't delete any snapshot that's older than this because we're purposely trying to grandfather.
Yeah. So Smash writes in. He says, Alan and Chris, and this starts as a pfSense question, but we might be able to take it broader than that too. He says he's on the East Coast as well, and he has a pfSense limiter traffic shaping question for us. Since Christmas, they now have 4 Roku devices, and they're blowing past their 300 gigabyte Comcast crapcast limit. He says, "Oh boy, man, a 300 gigabyte limit is rough. I've been trying to limit all of my daughter's outgoing internet access on a schedule. Oh man, what a pain in the butt, and cut them off at bedtime. I've had limited success. I was able to shut down their access at bedtime with a block firewall rule during bedtime schedule. But I put another rule in that uses limiters. The first rule, firewall is used, and then a new firewall is ignored. Next, I tried to use one firewall rule that used limiters with schedules. So I have one schedule that is bedtime hours and another that is not bedtime hours. In my up limiter, I have a 2 megabit. Well, he gives us all the details here. He says, last night I tested out for a bit my daughter's Roku devices, and they were still able to stream for 15 minutes after a bedtime schedule kicked in. I have triple checked the schedule configs. Maybe my PF limiters are do not like a 0 megabyte as value. I'm targeting an alias list that contains my daughter's static IP addresses. He says, my question is, am I going about this setup the right way? And is the best way to set up a blocking pool of IP addresses from reaching the internet based on schedules? Thanks for all you do and keep up the great work.
Yeah, I think the sentence there on line 11 is the one that might be catching him, is once the session's already open, it's in the state table, and a rule much earlier in the firewall says, if this is already an open connection that we've already allowed, we're not going to start blocking it all of a sudden. And then his rule saying, hey, don't allow traffic out after bedtime isn't kicking in at that point. I think that might be what's doing it.
That could be it on.
Yeah, and that one gets a little trickier. It's like if you want to cut off certain sessions and not others, and yeah. When I'm a parent, I'm not sure if I would use that bedtime rule thing, mostly because I've seen it. So when I used to play games a lot more than I have time to now, one of the people I played with was in school, and his parents had this set up. I think he was in high school, and his parents still had him cut off at, like, he couldn't use the internet after 10 p.m. So what he would do is come home from school, play on the internet until 10 p.m., then do his homework.
Yeah.
When he didn't have the internet.
Oh, yeah.
And it seems like that's the opposite of what you want them to be doing.
Yeah, so the way back in my day, the way my parents would, make me get off the internet is they'd say, okay, hang up, and now it was my dad's turn to get on the internet, and he would go start some big download or something, and he'd have the connection clogged up, and I just couldn't use it because the line was taken up. So what I'd do is I'd wait for him to go to bed, and I'd pick up the phone, and I'd hold down like the 9 key for long enough to make it disconnect him from the internet, and then I would dial back up and reconnect once everybody was in bed because dial-up was unreliable. So for all he knew, he just got disconnected.
Yeah, he just could never finish downloading this big file.
No. So it doesn't work. But you can try. I don't know what I'm going to do either. The cap thing scares me a lot because we pull down a lot of content online, and I hate the idea of having to manage it because we're running out of data. Ooh.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is, it's like, how do you do it? Do you say, well, you can only use a megabit per second or something, and then you're just slowing everything down enough that they can't eat it all up quickly enough? But, if they're going to watch the same number of movies no matter what, then is that really going to do anything?
And
if you shape it low enough, you could cause Netflix or whatever they're watching on Roku to go to a lower bit rate.
Yeah.
And maybe that's helpful.
But these caps are just going to force people to pirate because what are you going to do if you can't stream? Well, you just have a large local stash of stuff that you don't. You just
have to download that stuff.
Yeah, but you can do that like onesie twosies, right? And then store them up and then watch them over time over Plex, and you don't need. Yeah.
It's just the last 4 days of every month are just download fast.
Yeah. You look at how much cap you have left and just go like crazy. And then you just watch. I bet people people are already doing this, aren't they? That's already
I remember at one point my cap was only 75 gigs. That was horrible.
Oh. Do you have a cap now? Not now.
No, not now. But then after that, it was 300 plus gigs, and so I never ran into it.
Yeah. If I didn't go business here at the studio, I think the consumer grade internet here does have caps.
Well, the worst part is yours would be the upload.
Yes.
The cap, you get a cap and it counts to your upload.
Yeah.
And
I'm streaming 24/7.
An 800 kilobit stream 24/7. That's a 1 megabit stream is 350 gigs a month.
Yeah.
So you easily blow through a 300 gig cap just streaming the show.
So then we also have the audio stream that also is going.
The fact that right now I'm sending you a megabit stream.
Yeah.
Or when it was working in 16:9, I was sending you a 5 megabit stream.
Yeah. Yeah. So it really is, it just wouldn't, the cap thing just wouldn't work.
Yeah.
All right, Bridger writes in, or Biggie, depending on what nickname he wants to go by. And he has some questions, and we might be able to just apply some general knowledge to. He says, hey, guys, I have a question, but first I just want to say thanks for the show. He says, I've been toying around with web servers and OwnCloud. It's fun listening to you two talk about it since you're passionate and enjoy your work. Keep up the good work. I'm going to be setting up a few services for a small company. Basically, it's going to be an OwnCloud server and another one with Open Document for DMS, both on DigitalOcean servers. I try to go as low-tech as possible, and I try to add as few add-ons to the server to have a fewer attack surface. So no FTP, I'm just using SSH for connections. I just wanted to hear generally what I should be doing to secure my Ubuntu servers. Your ideas will be helpful keeping me focused on the best ways to secure the servers, since you guys are the best. Thanks again for the great show. And he wanted to hear me try to pronounce his name, which I probably did horribly. So general tips for keeping like a web server secure, Alan.
Yeah, there's a couple things. If you can make if you separate the directory where OwnCloud's storing the actual files from the directory where OwnCloud has its code, and basically make the place where OwnCloud has its code be read-only, especially to the user that is running the script as a web server, so that they can't...
Right. And I would add to that, because it kind of goes along with what you're saying, is make sure, and it will be on an Ubuntu box, the web server is running as a low-privileged user, so that way if they compromise your web server...
www or www-data or user...
Yeah, and it will be on that Ubuntu rig he sets up. So that's the number one thing, really, is make sure that anything that you can remotely connect to on that box doesn't run as root, if possible. So, like, for example, BitTorrent Sync, I run that as a standard regular user, and the only place that user account has access to is its home directory that it's syncing to. Outside of that, it can't get to anything. That way, when somebody compromises it, hopefully it limits the amount of damage that gets done. Of course, also patches. Keep your patches up to date, right, Alan?
Yep.
Update your S. There's a lot of good guides on securing Ubuntu specifically, but I think you've kind of got the good mindset keeping it minimal.
Yeah, and then... if I was doing it on FreeBSD, I know you don't want to hear this, but for everybody else, obviously this guy wants to use Ubuntu, and that's fine, and you should do that. But if you do it with the jail, you can use a nullfs mount so that the code for OwnCloud is read-only as far as the jail, where the actual PHP is getting executed, so that they can never modify the code for OwnCloud. And then if you just, with the path restrictions and so on in the web server, make sure that they can never run code that isn't in the OwnCloud directory, right? And so now they can't change those files, and they can't run files anywhere other than that, right? And then every file that's served out of the directory of the files where OwnCloud keeps its actual the user files, the data files, is only ever downloaded. Never gets executed. Then it should be pretty locked down.
Yeah. And I guess if...
then your only worry is someone actually downloading a file they're not supposed to have. You don't have to worry of them being able to run their own code on the server to do whatever they want to do.
And if you really wanted to go crazy, and if you really wanted to just try to make sure it's as secure as possible, look into AppArmor. It's a form of mandatory access controls that uses kernel level controls to make sure that only certain programs can run. And only those programs that run only do the things that you explicitly expect them to do. So what AppArmor will do, for example, is it'll allow Apache to go all day long. But as soon as Apache goes to an area in the system that it normally doesn't touch, AppArmor will prevent that and generate an alert for you.
FreeBSD also has mandatory access control like that. The most popular one is that I used to see, it's not so much anymore, was when people still had CGI scripts, is that you'd end up with, your Apache would end up running a Perl script out of /tmp. That would then change its process name to try to look like the web server, except for it always tried to look like one on Linux, and so it didn't match up and spot it. But,
there is a pretty good guide, and I think he's using 1404. He should be. The LTS. Use the LTS if you're using Ubuntu, so that way you get patches for more than a few months.
Yes, and you don't have the problem of having to upgrade, and that upgrade changes the versions of a bunch of stuff. Doesn't work.
Yeah. I'll put the AppArmor guide for Ubuntu 1404 in the feedback section for him, so that way, if it is something he wants to do, I mean, that would be like sort of the belt and suspenders. Really, though, I mean, I think it's focus on your user account privileges, focus on keeping your patches up to date, keep the software stack as minimal as possible. Don't forget, DigitalOcean droplets are cheap, so instead of adding a bunch of functionality, you could consider just having another droplet. And before you make big changes, take snapshots. Like before you roll out AppArmor, for example, why not take a snapshot and use
especially if you got it working. And that's the other thing. Is you probably want to do this incrementally, right? Get it working, then add this, then make sure it still works, and then add that. Because, if you make many changes at once and then something doesn't work, it's harder to figure out which thing's causing it not to work.
Yeah, that's for sure. So there you go.
One change at a time.
Now, you have your chance to get a question answered. Send that in to TechSNAP at jupiterbroadcasting.com. Go over to the contact page, and you can also just fill out our form online or start it up in our subreddit. We will be pre-recorded next week, but don't worry, you can still send your emails in, and we'll save them up for when we get back, and we love to get them. So I also love that subreddit. It's a great chance, too, to answer some questions since we are going to be in pre-record next week. If somebody posts a question and you want to jump in there and give them an answer right away, we always appreciate that, too. We have a great community. But, Alan, with the feedback all done, that means it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. Welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are stories that just didn't quite fit at the top of the show, but we still want to go over them and give you some links to follow up on your own. And heck, some of these links came from our great subreddit over at TechSNAP.reddit.com. Like our first Roundup story. You knew this was going to happen. Fraud comes to Apple Pay. Dun, dun, dun. And actually, Apple Pay, the software, seems to be in pretty good shape. Surprise, surprise, the weakness comes with the banks. Here, it says here, the weakness identified by the researcher occurs at an earlier stage when a user is adding a credit card to Apple Pay. When a user adds a card, Apple says it sends the information such as the type of phone, the last 4 digits of the user's phone number, and the user's general location to the issuing bank, which then decides whether to provision the card to Apple Pay. Isn't that interesting? All that information. They're looking at...
So... You don't actually enter your credit card number? You enter all this information?
No. So with Apple Pay, you take a picture of the credit card, and it reads, it OCRs all of that, and then it uses, of course, what they know about you. Apple knows about you by being an iPhone user, like your phone and your general location. The bank then gets all of that, which is a really interesting verification thing. I didn't know they were getting location. And the bank gets all of that, and then the bank decides whether to ask. So the software allows for the bank to then request more information for verification. This seems to be where things kind of fallen apart. It seems like in most cases, the banks, instead of asking, are so eager to get people to sign up for Apple Pay that they are maybe not asking the appropriate questions, or the customer service representatives that are looking at this stuff are not properly trained. Also because of a rush to get this out the door.
I would kind of assume it was an automated system. Like,
I would think so too. But
if you're taking a picture of the credit card and then you want it to work, you don't have 20 minutes to wait for somebody at the bank to look at it and decide.
I think when it gets bumped up to like, oh, we might have fraud here, then that's when the bank's supposed to have, and that's where they're sort of failing to actually suss it out.
Right.
So then
but
they're
I'm
allowing.
guessing the banks are just connecting it to their existing system and treating it as if the person stuck their credit card in the point of sales terminal at a store at the location they're being told about. And part of the reason that the system works the way it does, I think, is because Apple wanted to have low friction. So I can't know you can blame the banks for wanting it to be low friction too. But
right, yeah, true.
It just seems like, is that more secure than people typing in the credit card number and like the CVV? Is that the problem? Are they not using the CVC?
It's at the number on the back
it's tokenized.
So it's just there's no credit card information, no name, no expiration date, and no code exchange. Just each transaction has a token that is given from the user's phone to the merchant.
That's after the fact. That's for the actual Apple Pay transaction.
Yeah.
But when you're adding the credit card, is it not using that digit as the verification?
Yeah.
Well, I guess if you're taking a picture of the physical credit card.
Yeah, it uses it.
Yeah. But so basically they're saying the problem is the banks aren't
verifying.
So are people like physically stealing credit cards to do this, or
they're using they're putting stolen cards into the payment system, and then the banks, even though it's getting flagged, are allowing it through.
Right. And
then the merchants are having to pay for the fraud, I suppose.
Yeah.
That sucks.
Well, is Apple Pay really being used for anything that costs more than $20?
Probably not. No.
like
a burger,
I know,
a sandwich.
We have the tap to pay stuff here.
Yeah.
Except for most places, it only works up to $50, and then they're like, no, stick the chip in and type in your PIN card.
I don't think there's any limit on the amount. You could buy you can go down and buy like a $5,000 MacBook if you want it from the Apple Store using it. But
from the Apple Store, I can see that for sure.
Yeah.
But I meant like, if you're,
can you
go to Best Buy and buy a $1,000 TV with it?
Best Buy doesn't see no place that has big transactions is really taking it. It's like food. It's like pharmacies are taking it right now. That's where at least where I see it out in public.
It's a small fast transactions.
Yeah,
and I don't know that the fraud would be that lucrative.
Well, that might be why that's where it's at right now.
Right. Well, yeah, but I don't see, a gang going around stealing a bunch of credit cards in order to get free coffee.
I agree.
It's not quite the same as stealing credit cards to go to Best Buy and buy a bunch of TVs and
then
sell them on the black
about
market.
The clientele, the type of people, like, so you're stealing credit cards, and then you got to load it into a $600 smartphone.
Yeah. Which is basically a glorified tracking machine for the cops to track you down.
Yeah, because then they're sending their location when they do it. That doesn't seem like a good idea at all. All right.
No, the bigger question is, iPhones getting stolen is already an epidemic.
Yeah.
If I steal your iPhone, how hard is it for me to start getting free coffee out of your phone?
You got to have fingerprint ID. So however well that works.
Yeah. I imagine if I had that sticky clear paper that stuff they use on CSI that I could just lift your fingerprint off the screen and then use it again and again and again.
Speaking of CSI, I love this next story because I've actually just recently been doing something kind of similar to this. Threat Post watched CSI Cyber so that way we don't have to.
Yeah. They have a couple of clips, and my, does this look bad.
Should I play one? Might get us taken down.
I don't know. Yeah, that'll get us taken down.
But I don't know.
The best part is that they had a bunch of the people from there watch it while being in a chat, and then they posted their chat log along with the timestamps from the episode so that you can actually...
Yes, I'm seeing that. It's hilarious.
You can watch the episode and see where they're poking fun at it and so on.
The computer stock image they use to fade from present to tense, past tense, along with the beeping sounds, are really tough to take. Basic OPSEC from the Chinese, German, Japs, foreign voices. Oh my gosh. Holographic hand taking the SD card. All right, I got to just play just a second of it. I'll just play a second of it because this looks so
just mute
bad.
the sound and it'll be fine.
I got to hear it.
Hardware's clean. I'm bagging it for evidence. Didn't bear any fruit.
Listen to all those sounds.
Green code here.
Yes. The one guy you know is a hacker because he's got a neck beard. And then the girl's a hacker because she's got funny colored hair.
All green text, of course.
Malware.
Yeah.
Malware. Malware. Oh, man, look at that malware launch.
Oh, yeah, it's red.
Oh, no.
It's a black screen with green text, but if the text turns red, it's malware.
Found a rat.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah. Oh boy, that's pretty bad. I'm not going to play anymore. It's pretty bad.
I don't know how they decided on those people to play the characters either.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm glad that we're calling this.
I've seen other shows that have done better jobs at that stuff when that wasn't even their focus.
I think the Sandra Bullock movie The Net did a better job than that movie, than that TV show does. And that movie was quite bad, Alan.
Yes, and that TV show is trying very hard, and it's just.
Yeah, I was watching another show kind of for the same exact reason because I was going to do a breakdown on Filter on a show called State of Affairs, and they get their system hacked, and it just goes off the rails so bad.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about this. I just don't know where this is going to go, but that's our next roundup story. Google confirms it wants to become a wireless carrier. I have no idea what the ramifications of this could be. I suppose more competition is good. I don't know if I want Google to be that competition.
And I'm sure Google will be very cheap because they will make the money off knowing where you are all the time and using that.
Yeah, and you're using Google services and buying stuff from the Play Store. And wouldn't it be interesting, though, if Google is their own carrier, are they going to charge you for transfer from Google services? Or would all Google services be free? That
could be their big thing, is that unlimited transfer to Google Cloud stuff. So when you switch to storing, instead of having the music on your phone, you have it in
Google Music. They have a Google Music service.
And you can stream from it, and that streaming doesn't count against your bandwidth.
Documents, they've got Google Drive. They've got, Gmail is a bandwidth hog just in itself. If you have a lot of
really, the problem is that the bandwidth restrictions imposed by your cell phone company aren't about the backhaul to the internet. It's about the bandwidth between the tower and your phone, and there's only so much for the people on that tower.
Yeah.
And I don't see that Google has solved that.
Right, because they'd extend that even to Hangouts? Because could you imagine if Hangouts was free? They'd have to charge for data. They'd have to.
Yeah, and basically, unless they're going to build a whole bunch of towers.
No, they're going to use Sprint and T-Mobile, it sounds like.
Right. And so, there's only so much bandwidth there.
Yeah.
And you have to have some limits on it. Otherwise, people would just go nutty. But, Google's perfectly willing to lose money. So.
Yeah, that's true. All right, our next roundup story is a post over at the AWS maintenance blog. An important update about upcoming AWS security maintenance. Does that mean an outage is coming, Alan?
Yes. So there's apparently another critical flaw in Zen. It hasn't been publicly released yet, but Amazon and some of the other places that use Zen are having to...
That better not come out the week we're gone. Well, we'll talk about it when we get back.
Amazon posted an update to that saying that fewer servers than they thought will have to reboot because they're able to live migration stealth patch it.
What an idea. What an idea. Well, good to know.
But there are still some instance types that will have to be rebooted, and they've posted a date, and they're like, we'll apply the patch by this time. So if between when we've applied the patch and when we're scheduling the downtime, you can reboot the instance yourself. Or no, sorry, not reboot. You have to actually stop and start it, because that way it'll come up on a box that's already been patched. Instead of, if you reboot the instance, that stays on the machine it's on. But if you stop it and start it again, it will come up on one of the machines that's already been patched.
No.
So that way you can do it at your convenience instead of when they're just randomly gonna.
That's nice.
And if you're if you're following Amazon best practices and you have multiple VMs in multiple availability zones, those won't ever reboot at the same time. So your service shouldn't go down if you're using Amazon the right way, which is using many different virtual machines in different availability
different zones
and so on.
Yeah.
Most people think, Amazon means paying for renting one Amazon EC2 instance like you would from Dropbox or DigitalOcean. But it's not. If you want to use Amazon the Amazon way, you're paying the hundreds of dollars a month per instance for multiple ones in order to be sure that not all of them are going to be down at once. Yeah. Craziness.
Alan, this next story I like a lot. Just not that I'm a dark cloud, but sometimes when the Kickstarter hype gets super strong, it's good to remind us that every now and then things can go wrong.
In particular, this one's more about a bunch of photographer type people that don't know anything about software, assuming that they can just make software.
Yeah. So this is a $500,000 Kickstarter.
Yeah. So they proposed the Kickstarter for 50,000. British pounds, so about $100,000. So the goal for this Kickstarter was £100,000.
Okay.
To make these $99 things that trigger your camera to take time lapses and so on. They got $500,000 in funding for it, and a year and some later, it turns out they're not going to be able to make the product because they spent 10 times more than they budgeted on software, because I imagine their budget for software was literally just made up out of thin air. It's like, software, that'll be $20,000 or something. Like, they just made up the number. I don't know what it was based on, but it was complete baloney. And also they're like, they based the whole device around, we're going to buy this microprocessor and use it. And then it turns out it's not going to work. So then you just switch it, and then they had to start over or something. But also they found out to buy all the parts to make the product that they finally came up with, and that their software will run on, they'd have to sell the devices for $350 a piece instead of $99 a piece. And so now
that's awful.
And then they're like, well, if we can get enough pre-orders, and then they got like 1% of the people that said they would pre-order actually were willing to pay for the new price.
Jeez. That's kind of sad, but that's the risk you take with these Kickstarter projects, because people don't always have a background. It's one of the things I look at.
It's definitely, you see this, near the end, when they had already screwed up a bunch of times, they hired a real project manager, and he was like, if you had brought this to me in the beginning, I would have told you, don't even try this with less than $2 million.
Yeah.
But they also talk about some of the other stuff, like, because they were only thinking that this project was going to be a $100,000 project, when they got the $500,000, they had so much money in the bank, they were just like, if we have a problem, we'll just throw money at it. And they weren't as cautious with the money as they should have been, and they spent too much of it on things they didn't necessarily need.
It's painful to hear this.
Yeah. But I think you can see a similar problem with some of the ones where when you get too much funding and you start having with these stretch goals, right? It's like, it'll cost this much to make the game, but if we get this a little bit more, we'll add this feature to it or that feature, right? And then they start adding them a little too eagerly, right? And you get this scope creep. And all of a sudden, if we get 20% more money, we'll add this extra feature, which is actually going to take 60% more time. And so, that the scope creep is what kills them too.
Yeah, very much. Oh, that's kind of a sad one.
Mostly, I think their big problem here was their budget was complete fantasy. Yeah. I don't think it was based on, obviously they hadn't built one of these products before, so they didn't have that.
Right, and then you have the flip side. Like Pebble has a Kickstarter going on right now that's like $15 million in funding, massively successful because they've shipped a product. They've proven they can do it. And I think that's what we're starting to see now is the Kickstarters that are backed by people that have experience delivering the thing that they're kickstarting. Those, I think, have a much higher chance of succeeding because people are going to get a little more savvy about this kind of stuff.
Yes, but also, sometimes it's more that there's just a celebrity name attached to it or something.
And so
it's like,
just the right amount of flash, even.
Right, yeah. Or, it's like, this is the funding for a movie, and there's these big name actors in it. Yes, but who's actually producing it and who's actually directing it, and is it actually going to happen on that budget?
Right.
And, yeah. Although, then we see the most successful Kickstarter where, it was a card game that's easy to produce. There's not much risk of it not working.
Yes.
And, their goal was $10,000 and they got, what was it, like $8 million or something?
Yeah, it was crazy. Yeah. All right, this next story, guess what? Not a big... Well, it is kind of a surprise after all of the hoopla about default encryption on iOS 8 and Lollipop. It seems that Google sort of quietly backed off default encryption on Lollipop devices in their requirements for OEMs. If you look...
In September 2014, Google announced that with Android 5.0, all manufacturers were going to be required to do full disk encryption by default on all cell phones. However, when they... announced the second-gen Moto E and Galaxy S6, all of a sudden it's whole disk encryption is strongly recommended rather than required.
Yeah, and the rumor has it that when they started requiring it, I don't know if it's because Android uses extended file system or what it is, but like the performance, I guess. So what I read was they tried default encryption on the new Nexus 6, the phone you have. And that the performance when they turned on encryption was worse on that device than it was on the old Nexus 5 phone. Like, just it got so slow that like the manufacturer's like, we can't ship our phones with this.
I don't think ARM supports like ASNI or something to actually offload the encryption.
And I think Android needs a slightly different file system, or totally different file system, to make it a little bit faster too.
Yeah.
Because it didn't seem to be a problem for iOS. I mean, iOS is still shipping with encryption, and it doesn't seem to be any slower. So.
Right. Well, they have a special chip in theirs. I don't know if Android does or not.
Yeah.
And also, I'm sure there might have been pushback from governments in certain countries. And if you're a phone manufacturer from that country, you're like, hey, Google, could you say that, change that from required to recommended so that we can ship our phones without it?
The other thing that wasn't clear is like it also kind of competes. So a couple of the different Android manufacturers. The one I'm thinking of predominantly though is Samsung. Like they have like Samsung Knox. It's like their own encryption vault that they want the customer to use. Right. So some of their very own hardware OEMs are shipping competing products on their devices. It's not kind of sorta. So, Alan, this next story, why SSDs are obsolete?
Yep.
I'm still madly in love. What is it? Now I'm just going right to the chips? What's going on?
But the biggest problem is obviously, we have this level of indirection. SSDs are not hard drives, but an SSD basically presents itself to the computer as a hard drive because that's all your computer knows how to deal with.
Yeah.
And so that has problems. Then you have the flash translation layer. How many of these have we seen bugs in causes all kinds of problems, right?
Yeah.
We've seen lots of firmware bugs and problems where like, oh, on this SSD, once it gets full, the performance just shits the bed or whatever. And also we've seen like over provisioning things and basically the SSDs become this big black hole and you don't understand what's actually happening inside of it. And whereas when we see some newer stuff like the NVMe, which is non-volatile memory express, so these are cards that go into your PCI Express port. Now there are SSDs that do this, but with an NVMe, the idea is that the driver understands that what you're talking to is actually just flash memory, and it's not pretending to be a hard drive.
Yeah. That's pretty good.
And iX is shipping these for ZFS now as well.
I guess it's time to transition, Alan. One step forward.
Not necessarily. In your laptop and your desktop, you probably still want SSDs.
Do I?
But, your laptop's probably not going to get an NVMe anytime soon. And your desktop is probably overkill. It's more just that in servers, it's starting to take over. And hopefully we'll actually start seeing more things like NAND FS, where all the equivalent of the flash translation layer and so on, and all the wear leveling algorithm and all that is happening in software as part of the file system driver so that you have knobs you can tweak, right? Like depending on my uses, I want to decide how much over provisioning I want, and how much slack I want and when to trim stuff and how to deal with all of that.
Right. That would be... I could see how a user could break their system,
when there's a bug, it could be fixed more easily.
Yeah. I could see how, though, you could introduce bugs, too. Like, it's almost like it could go the other way, where it could be too much control, you could do too much damage if something...
Yes. But...
It's true with everything, though, I suppose.
The Unix way of doing things is not stopping you doing something stupid, because that would also stop you doing something clever.
Yeah. Yep. And I think when it's in the right hands, it makes it for a better system. All right.
It's like anything, right? It's a very useful tool, but you can hurt yourself with it.
Yeah. Our last story is, don't tell me, another flaw that affects everything Android 5.0 and less?
Everything less than 5.0. 5.0 is safe.
5.0
for this particular one.
Okay. What is it?
It's a root vulnerability in the way Java does something on Android.
Yeah. It says when the object input stream is used on untrusted inputs, an attacker can cause an instance of any class with a non-privileged parameterless constructor to be created. They can have arbitrary values. The malicious object will then typically either be ignored or cast type to which it doesn't fit, implying that no methods will be called in on it and no data from it will be used. However, when it's collected by the GC will call the object's finalized method. So some execution there.
Yeah,
little privilege
you construct an object that won't be very useful, but when the system garbage collects it, it will run whatever code you specify that's in the cleanup method.
Yeah.
And then you root the device.
So you wait for the system to get busy where it does a little cleanup, and then you've got it.
Yeah. And so apparently this was fixed. So the issue was reported in June of 2014, and proof of concept was shared with Android people. The issue was verified by security@android.com. Then a patch was published in November of 2014 and became part of the Android open source port thing. And then he asked for Android and asked him if it was okay to disclose it, and Android said yes.
Do you see the part about how he gets around or why ASLR doesn't prevent it?
No, I didn't see that.
It says Android does have ASLR, but like all apps, system_server is forked from the Zygote process. In other words, all apps have the same basic memory layout as system_server and should therefore be able to circumvent system server's ASLR. Yeah. That sounds like a problem too.
But yeah, apparently if you take his proof of concept code and just install an app and open it, it will
and then once it roots it, it reboots the device and it's owned.
Yep. Yep.
But everybody's on Android 5 and above, so it shouldn't be a problem, I don't think.
I finally am.
Yeah, you are. Yeah, you are. That's right. Congratulations. And you like it?
501. Yeah,
do you like it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice.
I really like the priority feature, basically being like, it's silence mode, basically, but auto turn off after whatever amount of time I set.
Yeah.
And if someone in my contact list has a star by their name, they can make the phone ring anyway.
Yeah, that is really nice. Yeah. All right. Well, guess what? That brings us to the end of episode 204 of the TechSNAP program. We'd love to get your feedback, so go to jupiterbroadcasting.com, click that contact link. Also, you can go to the subreddit, techsnap.reddit.com, and join us live. We won't be live next week, but following that, we're live at 1 p.m. Pacific over at jblive.tv, which is...
going to change on Sunday, so
I forgot about that.
How does that work?
It's spring ahead, right?
Right.
Yes.
So the UTC, so instead of 2100, it'll be 2000? That's not right.
I don't know, Al. This is the worst part. We do have the calendar page that'll convert it. I mean, that's good. 2100
right. So
UTC.
it'll be 2000 UTC, right? Because it has been 2100.
Yes.
But be careful, if you're in Europe, your daylight savings time doesn't start for like 2 more weeks compared to ours.
It's going to be weird for a little while.
All screwed up.
Man, go figure. We're going to be off the week that daylight savings hits. It's going to mess people up, but we'll be back. Just keep an eye on the calendar, jupiterbroadcasting.com/calendar. It'll manage all of that for you. Because we'd love to have you join us live because we do stuff in between segments. We chat with the live stream between segments.
I'm just glad this time that the time zone change happens before I leave for the conference.
Yes.
At Meet BSD every year, or every second year when they have it, the time zone change is in the middle of the conference.
That's horrible.
One day of the conference is in summertime, and the next day is in wintertime.
Oh, Alan.
So you lose an hour of sleep in the middle of a conference where you weren't getting enough sleep as it is.
And traveling on top of it. Woo!
Yeah.
Woo!
Oh, yeah. Yes, it'd be worse if the daylight savings time happened on a day where you're actually traveling. That would be worse.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for tuning in this week's episode of TechSNAP. We'll see you right back here next week.